Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode review of season 8 of Game of Thrones. As you can tell by the title, this is season 8, episode 2, titled A A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Sorry, for some reason I blanked on that for a second. It's a very interesting title. It's another episode that takes place pretty much, well, most definitely entirely at Winterfell, which is seemingly where all the major action is happening now in the series. And basically, we are getting very, very close to that ultimate moment where we have to battle the undead army or the dead army. And this episode is kind of like the calm before the storm, or, the peace before all hell breaks loose, or any other kind of cliche term you want to use for a calming period before a, uncalming period or a very wild and chaotic period. That is kind of what this episode is. And it's a rather bittersweet episode if you pick up on a lot of what is going on within it. In a sense, this could very well be our last goodbye for many of these characters that have been through, throughout the series for a rather long time. Some of these have been all the way back from season 1 and season 2, and we don't know who's going to live and who's going to die. So in this episode, we get to spend a lot of time just doing, character things, having character moments. This is a great character episode, and I know there's going to be people out there who are, upset that this is essentially one of those episodes and there's not a lot of things happening to advance the plot in a lot of ways. There's no big, grand battle happening yet, but I got a feeling we're going to get one in the next episode and probably going to get a one or two more, before the end of this series. So starting off, we pretty much pick up exactly where last week's episode left off. Jaime Lannister has arrived at Winterfell. He got the stare down from Bran as he got off his horse, right at the main, gated entrance there. And now he's brought before pretty much everybody, and he's getting grilled by Daenerys, and they are kind of deciding what to do with him. And what they pretty much decide to do in a rather quick amount of time is just let him, join up and be part of the army. Essentially, let him, roam free. Don't lock him up. Don't punish him in any way or anything like that, because he does come with seemingly altruistic intentions, at least from what we understand so far. He basically has come to tell them that Cersei has betrayed them, is now going to bring her army, which is something we as audience members already knew, but the people at Winterfell didn't know that. They were, expecting an army, and all they got was, a one-armed Jaime Lannister. Not the best thing when you're expecting so much more, but he has arrived, and he is now reuniting or meeting for the first time many characters that he has not met before, which led to a very, very interesting and fantastic scene around a fire that happened later on in the episode, which I'll get to. But I want to stick, in some type of coherent order here. So basically, Daenerys turns to um, John and says, "What do we do with them?" He says that they should, we can use all the men we can get. What I thought was going to happen, what did actually happen during that whole sequence, is Brienne stood up and spoke positively for him and basically vouched for him and kind of told them about, that time where she was rescued by him. Way back when, a few seasons ago, and essentially kind of just vouching for his character. And it's very interesting how far that character has come. He has really come, having a full arc in the sense that he started basically being an antagonist, a really bad douchebag asshole type guy, and he's now kind of not fully redeemed himself, but has gotten pretty close. And there's also kind of the full circle aspect of him starting off at Winterfell at the very beginning, and now he's back at Winterfell now, and he is a very different person. And he and Tyrion acknowledge those things in a rather interesting scene between them, where they basically acknowledge how different they are than they were in their younger forms. He was the young lion, all bravado, all ego. Tyrion was basically kind of just this drunk whoremonger, for the lack of a better term, and they are now, like, completely different. They are, those days are behind them, and it's very interesting how Jamie says that, you can always go back to them if you want to. And I don't think Tyrion has an interest in that anymore. It kind of shows how far he has come throughout the series. But it's an episode where you get a lot of those very intimate conversations between characters. You get a lot of those things happening. You got a very important one, I think, between Sansa and Daenerys. Sansa and Daenerys had kind of a sit down détente, if you will, a fancy term for, I guess, a meeting or whatnot. And they kind of, made each other's intentions known. And Sansa is very stone cold, very, pragmatic about the whole thing. She's very, upfront. She's essentially, what her concern is that, men do really dumb things when they're in love, as we've seen not only throughout the series, but as we've seen in movies and other television series and, real life in general and all those kinds of things. And she's concerned that Jon is being manipulated by Daenerys. And Daenerys basically kind of counters that by saying that she had no original intention to be where she is right now. She had no intention to be at Winterfell fighting a dead army. She had, or her main concern was getting her throne that she has always wanted, and that was fighting in the South, fighting the Lannisters and, the usurper and all that kind of stuff. And in a way, she asked, like, who is the one who has been manipulated if I'm here when I'm not supposed to be here. It's a very interesting conversation that ended when it ended in a very interesting way, because Sansa pretty much tells her that the North doesn't want to be a part of the Seven Kingdoms anymore when this is all over. That they pretty much aren't a part of it now, and you can understand why, because since Ned Stark went down south, things have gone pretty bad for the North and all of its little kingdoms up there. And they don't want any part of it anymore because they don't trust anybody from the South anymore. And that's kind of where their conversation ended. And that's going to lead to a very interesting conversation, perhaps later on, depending on what happens with the Battle of Winterfell that's coming up very soon. And what is interesting is that you see more preparation for that. You see Jamie and Brienne have a nice conversation where Brienne, we learn, is she is commanding the left, I believe, the left flank or the left vanguard of the army, and Jamie wants to basically, enlist and be under her command, which is a very interesting switch of roles that it really just further shows how different Jamie is. And Brienne actually calls him out on it, saying, we've never had a conversation where you haven't, made fun of me or talked down to me or had a comment or anything like that. And it's very bewildering to her to be treated in a rather, I guess you could say, respectful way or normal way. and and it's very, you know, fascinating how far their relationship has come and where their relationship is right now. We also get a scene between Missandei and Grey Worm, which is a scene between two characters that we don't get to see. We haven't seen much from this season so far. Granted, it's only been 2 episodes, but they basically are making kind of plans for what happens when this is all over. And part of me is like, oh, that's very nice. That's very, it's very cute that they have this really heartwarming relationship, that they found each other amidst all this war and chaos and all the things that the Unsullied have gone through, and what she has been essentially a slave all her life, and it's really nice. But inside, and part of me has to come to the realization that perhaps they're setting us up for heartbreak, in the sense that Grey Worm or perhaps Missandei may die during this battle at some point, or at some point throughout the rest of the series. And it's also very interesting how they feel like outcasts in the North. And that kind of makes a lot of sense, because the North really doesn't trust anybody, let alone people whom they've never ever heard of or never ever seen before. And that could due to the racial the racial aspects of the Missandei and Grey Worm and the Unsullied. And a lot of people have pointed that out on social media, and it's not exactly untrue. I mean, what we've learned about the North is that it is a very white place when it comes to race, or at least from the people that we've seen and the cultures that we've seen up there. And that's a very interesting thing that they never really delved into is the diversity within the Seven Kingdoms, or lack thereof to a certain extent. And so Grey Worm and Missandei have a nice scene, but I think that's going towards heartbreak. We have Gilly and Sir Davos have a really interesting scene with a young girl she wants to fight because I think she said her brothers were soldiers or something like that, and she decides, and they basically convince her to go down to the crypts and the catacombs where everybody is going to go who's not fighting, the children, the elderly, the women, etc., etc. And they kept bringing that up several times, like, oh, it's going to be safer down there, it's going to be not safer than up here. And when they say stuff like that repeatedly, usually that is a hint of foreshadowing. And there's been a lot of buzz online about when the Night King comes, that he is going to raise all of the dead people from the crypts and the catacombs, and he is going to use them, as part of his army and kill all the people down there. That would be very, very dark because those people are essentially defenseless, and they're helpless. And I know Game of Thrones has gone pretty dark in the past, but that would be very, very dark. But it's not out of the realm of possibilities. Unfortunately, at this point, anything could possibly happen with the show. Well, almost anything. There are certain things I don't think are going to happen, but a lot of people dying at once is a high possibility at this point. With battle and warfare, those things kind of go hand in hand. And of course, the young girl reminds Sir Davos of Shireen, who he had a relationship with, who was just brutally, burned at the stake alive a few seasons ago. And it was just a really difficult scene to watch, I think, for a lot of viewers. And I think when Sir Davos found out about it, he was very, very, taken aback by it, very, very hurt by it. So this is kind of a reminder of that character who he really cared for. It's very interesting that I completely forgot that Gilly is actually at Winterfell and she came with Sam. That's what happens when you don't rewatch the previous season and it aired 2 years ago. You forget little details like that. Speaking of Sam, he once again has another scene in this episode. He has a scene with Ser Jorah where Sam gives him the Valyrian sword that is his family sword that he stole the last time he was, at his family's place down in the south. And he gives it to him, basically saying that I have no use for it. I'm going to be in the catacombs. I'm not a fighter. We all know this from Sam, from throughout the series, that he's not somebody who's a fighter. Although he has killed a White Walker, he has fought before. It's not like he's not capable of doing it. It's just not his forte. And what is very interesting is that he also mentions that, Ser Jorah's father really taught him a lot about becoming a better person and becoming a man and all those things. And you kind of forget that Ser Jorah's father was, the head of the Night's Watch at Castle Black. You forget a lot of those things if you haven't been rewatching the series or anything like that, because you haven't really heard about that character in a very long time. So this season's really bringing back a lot of the early season stuff and connecting it and just reaffirming a lot of those things, connecting them in a very, very good way. And that is when we get, and another, yeah, this is when we get to kind of another connecting scene. As I mentioned last week, the way the episode ended, you had Tormund Giantsbane, and you had Dolorous Ed, and you had Beric Dondarrion, all at the last hearth, and they basically got that message from the Night King, and they had to make their way down to Winterfell, going around the dead army to get there to warn them that, hey, the dead army is on their way. They are very close, and they're going to be here very soon. And they do that, and they arrive, and basically, I think they said you have about a day or so, a day and a half to get ready. And So we know that that's happening very soon, and the rest, and that happens very early on in the episode, and the rest of the episode is, like I said, a lot of people talking, communicating, reminiscing. There is there are, new relationships being created in this episode, and other relationships that are being further explored, and that's specifically with Arya. Arya in this episode, has a personal milestone in being, sexually active, or having her first, intimate sexual experience in her life with Gendry, who is someone, of course, she knew when she was much younger. And there was hints of that throughout the last episode. There was maybe even hints of that several seasons ago, the way their relationship was kind of budding into this almost young romance type thing. And this episode obviously, sealed that off. And there were a lot of people who didn't like that scene, or they felt awkward about that scene, or whatever you had, whatever, negative feelings you have, or trepidations you have. It to me, it was a scene that I think was kind of inevitable to a certain extent. At least if that was their end game, if you know what I mean. Also, it was something that a lot of fans were calling for as well. So they got what they wanted. Perhaps they didn't get it the way they actually wanted, but to be frank and to be honest, at this point, the children, the Stark children, and the young children who started out the series as children are now adults, and they're going to be doing adult things. Arya specifically has always been much more mature than I think the other children in the series. She was exposed to a lot of harsh realities of the world of Game of Thrones at a very young age. She has committed lots and lots of murder. As we remember, she pretty much killed the entire Frey family. That's the term we like to call genocide, if you will. And I think her being very sexual and being very sexually aggressive toward Gendry, or toward Gendry, is not the most radical thing that she has done. That's just my feelings on it, and it definitely shows how far she's come as a character. And yes, the age difference is of course there. As yeah, I believe if we they're both adults, but of course Gendry is much older, so there is an age gap there that is, an inevitability of the situation. But I didn't mind that sequence so much as others did, you know. And like she said, they could be their last moment on Earth together, or in alive. So she wanted to fulfill that, I guess, need, if you want, or that, that personal milestone that I think a lot of people feel that they have to fulfill at some point in their lives. He also finished making that weapon that she wanted him to make from the last episode, which is essentially a bow type weapon that has dragon glass blades, I believe, on both ends, so she can use it during the battle, which I believe she's going to fight in. That's seemingly the case. I thought that perhaps since she is technically royalty or nobility, that she would be perhaps more protected. Because obviously Sansa is not a fighter; she won't be fighting. Daenerys typically doesn't fight, but I think she will be riding her dragons during the fight. And I want to touch on Daenerys later on in later on, when specifically her scene with John, which was the very last scene of the episode, or close to the last scene of the episode. But I do want to now touch upon probably the best sequence that was in the episode, at least for me, was the sequence of all of these characters sitting around the fire and just talking. And it's a really fantastic scene. Now, hopefully, my memory serves well here, and I'm able to get everybody that was there. Um, so Davos was there, Brienne was there, Jamie was there, Tyrion was there, Podrick was there, and Tormund Giantsbane was there. And it's a very, very interesting sequence of all of these characters, whom some are friends or compadres, and some are not. Certainly, Jamie is the newest person to enter this band, so he didn't know who Tormund Giantsbane was, or even Sir Davos. Um, and it was very interesting first impressions with Tormund Giantsbane, who is still, oh man, actively pursuing Brienne romantically, although she is completely not interested at all. And he keeps trying throughout this episode in vain. And he probably should really give it up at this point because it's not going to happen at all, as much as he may want it. And you get an interesting origin story about his name, why he's called Giant's Bane. Really, really kind of funny. You get a really great great song and montage sequence by being sung by Podrick. Really beautiful song, and the song is actually now available, performed by Florence and the Machine, and it's a beautiful, beautiful song, and it's done over a montage where you see, all of these characters and what they're doing throughout Winterfell and whatnot, and you also during the scene you get one of I think the best moments perhaps of the entire series, at least for me personally. I've always really loved the Brienne of Tarth character. I really love how she is very much an antithesis of all of the other women in the series to a certain extent. I think Arya is as close to her as possible, but even then, she's different than her. And in this scene, as she finally gets knighted, she gets recognition for being a warrior, which she has always really been, at least from what we've seen throughout her character throughout the series. And it was a really fantastic moment. Right before it, Tormund Giantsbane had this great line where he's like, "Oh, you're not a knight," and he's like, "Why?" And she's like, "Oh, it's against tradition." And he goes, excuse my language here, but he goes, fuck tradition," and I'm like, "Yeah, fuck tradition. It's very quite possibly the end of your existence right now, or at least the end of the Seven Kingdoms, or the beginning of the end of the Seven Kingdoms. Tradition went out the window a long time ago in Westeros." So Jamie says that he can knight her, and he does. And it's a really, really fantastic scene. It's a heartwarming scene because of the relationship between Jamie and Brienne, and also that everyone kind of cheers for her because I think they recognize the importance of that moment and they recognize the importance of this character. But yet again, it's one of those things that Game of Thrones has done and other series has done, where when you do something really positive and really happy for a character, that usually means something bad is going to happen to them or in the show in general. Brienne could very well die in next week's episode or at some point before the series ends, and I wouldn't be that surprised because of this moment and because it being a little bit foreshadowing. um yeah, that was a great, great scene. There's another scene in the episode that I thought was another foreshadowing bit. But before then, Theon Greyjoy arrives from his journey rescuing his sister in the last episode, and he is now at Winterfell, and he basically asks Sansa, "I took this castle once before, and now I want to fight for it. Will you allow me to do that?" And she embraces him, and I thought that was very interesting for Sansa because she hasn't shown that type of warm emotion in a very long time. And she's shown it here and she's shown it now, specifically with a character of Theon Greyjoy, who also was an awful character, morally early on in the series. He did a lot of terrible things, a lot of really dumb things, and he is now, on a track of redemption that I think is not quite fulfilled yet. And I think it's going to be fulfilled very soon. And that's what I'm getting at is I think he's going to die, in the next episode, or he's going to die in a sacrificial way, sacrificing himself to save one of the Stark children, to save somebody. And I think that because their strategy when it comes to battling the Night King and his army is to lure the Night King out by using Bran as bait, because the Night King is lured to Bran because he has essentially branded brand on his arm, and the Night King has always, I guess, pursued the Three-Eyed Raven or whatever lore that they haven't really fully delved into yet. They've delved into it a lot, but I don't think we still really understand the Three-Eyed Raven's powers, his connection to the to the old world and all that kind of stuff. I think really still needs to be fleshed out, and I don't know if they have enough time to do it, but I would like to see it happen. So they're going to use Bran to flesh out the Night King because they feel like once they kill him, then everything will be, the army won't be controlled anymore. Therefore, they win the battle. And Theon said, and they basically said, well, we can't just let you go out there alone. And Theon pretty much says, I'll go out there with him. He won't be alone. So Theon Greyjoy, I think, is dying. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised to see not only him die, but I think you're going to see some other andmaybe lesser characters die next week. I think Beric Dondarrion is kind of a disposable character at this point. I don't think Sandor Clegane is going to die next week. You still have to have him fight the Mountain, I think. The fans really, really want that to happen, and I think that has to happen at some point. You got another great scene between him and Arya, where Arya asks him, why are you here? You joined up with the Brotherhood, you went beyond the wall, you're here now, and she's like, you've never fought for anyone but yourself, and he says, I fought for you once. It's very interesting relationship that those two had early on and that they have now. And you also see how far Sandor Clegane has come. He's always been a very fascinating character, and character with many levels, and you're not quite sure what his motivation has been. And it's a very interesting, you know, it's just interesting where they're going to go with this character. Is he going to die perhaps saving Arya at some point? Who really knows? And that was a great scene, but there are other characters I think, like Dolores said, that could possibly go. Tormund Giantsbane could die in the upcoming battle, and that would be my prediction. And we actually got just completely random here. Excuse me, as the randomness just flows through my head. We got a ghost sighting in this episode. We haven't seen Ghost, who I believe is the one of the two last remaining direwolves in a very long time. And I think that has to do a lot with the CGI budget being used in other areas, specifically the dragons. The dragons are probably take a lot of the budget. They probably take all of the CGI budget. And what we saw from Ghost in this episode is that they kind of just got a regular white wolf to stand in to be Ghost. There was no, I don't think, any overlay CGI to make him larger than a regular wolf, which was kind of disappointing to me because dire wolves are supposed to be, these big, ancient creatures who are, larger than wolves. If you're curious, the other dire wolf that I believe is still out there is Nymeria, who is Arya's wolf. I think, and I think we saw her a couple of seasons ago, and hopefully we can maybe get to see her one more time, perhaps. I really hope Ghost doesn't die in the actual upcoming battle, because my heart can't take to see any more of these dire wolves die, especially the way in which they die is just so sad to me. I have a very soft spot for animals and them dying in movies and television, and of course in real life as well, which of course TV and movies are not, but I still have those feelings. So anywho, let's kind of wrap this up here by one of the last moments and probably one of the most pivotal moments of the series or of the season so far, kind of mirroring or connecting to what happened in the last episode where Jon learned about his lineage. Is he is now telling his lineage to Daenerys. He is once again down in the catacombs, down in the tombs, just reminiscing about his father, I guess, or maybe about a mother he never knew, or whatever he's doing down there. But he likes to spend a lot of time brooding down there. So Daenerys comes to see him, and because he's been kind of giving her the cold shoulder throughout the episode, you see him, not look at her directly. You see him kind of just, moving past her, walking away, not interacting with her at all. And you can kind of understand he's probably a box of emotions. He's a closed box of emotions. He's probably has a lot of conflicting emotions in there, and he doesn't really know what to do, how to say it, how to pursue the relationship or the partnership or whatever it is he has with Daenerys. So he comes out and tells her, my real name is Aegon Targaryen. My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen. They were secretly married. Bran saw it in a vision, and Samwell and Sam, saw it in the when he was reading books at the Citadel. Yet again, to me, still not the most definitive way to confirm someone's proper lineage, but it's Game of Thrones, and I guess weirder things have happened. But speaking of weird things, once again, the reaction was not what I expected it to be when given this information to a character. Last week, John was worried about it being treasonous and him being a threat to Danny's claim to the throne. And once again, Danny's first reaction is that John has a claim, is the firstborn, and is of course the rightful heir to the throne, putting her second in line to the throne. And she was very taken aback by that, and she didn't quite gasp, but you could almost see the horror in her eyes as she kind of recoiled somewhat backwards at that information. And I say that it's a weird reaction, and I'm so confounded by it because, as we know, they have had a sexual and physically sexual relationship more than once. That was probably a long boat ride from the South all the way here. We saw them go on that little waterfall date last week, and so things have happened in that area, and neither of them have seemed to be too concerned about that information or that fact. So I don't know if it's just like in the shock of the moment, that's the first thing they think of, or to them it's not a big thing. I really don't know how to interpret it, and I don't know what they're going to do going forward. Because the one thing that we've learned about Jon Snow so far, and I don't know, I can't remember if I mentioned it last week, is that he really doesn't have any interest in being a king and being a ruler or anything like that. Even when he was ruling Castle Black and being the head of the Night's Watch, it's not something that he wanted or he advocated for. It was basically Sam kind of rigged that to happen. And it's very interesting what's going to happen going forward. What's going to happen when this is all said and done, and who does end up on the throne. And to me right now, having a claim for the throne doesn't matter. I don't think a lineage matters right now in Westeros. There's no governing body out there to affirm or unaffirm whether someone should or should not be king or queen. It's basically whoever wins and conquers is gets to be the ruler. That's seemingly the way things are going, and that's kind of the way medieval warfare went, or the way warfare goes in general. To the victors go the spoils, and it's all gonna depend on who is going to win out in the end. Now, what does this mean when it comes to the Starks and the Targaryens? Well, it means that their families, their houses are now linked. What is also interesting in this episode is, like I said, Arya and Gendry getting together, and Gendry revealing that he is basically the last living heir to Robert Baratheon, or he's the bastard of Robert Baratheon. So at some point, if he survives the upcoming battles, that he could be the head of House Baratheon, and if he and Arya have this romantic thing going forward, once again, the House Stark and House Baratheon will be interlocked with one another. So those are all things to think about in the future. I mean, that yet again, it all depends on what happens next week in this grand battle that I hope is what's coming, because this build up is build up, and we're going to hopefully get the payoff. So I think I've covered a lot of things in this episode. If I haven't covered something major, please forgive me. Kind of all these things have been going through my head, and I don't want to make this episode be so long that I'm going to keep you guys here for an hour, just me talking. So, with all of that being said, if you like these videos, please check out my movie reviews, my Blu-ray reviews, my haul videos, everything that I've been doing here on the channel for the last almost 3 years. My 3-year anniversary is coming up relatively soon. So, thank you all for watching, and please, if you like this video, watch next week as well.